Last video, we talked about lawn care program startups. This video, let's jump into the meat and potatoes of springtime applications. Hope y'all enjoy it. We'll start with Fescue. Let's identify, the time of year we're starting. What is the turf grass doing? Is it actively growing? Is it dormant? What can we apply that's going to provide an immediate improvement to the lawn? Does that mean we go with a high rate of fertilizer to give it a real quick green up? Or what? What are we going to do that's going to provide something immediate so that way when the customer gets the bill, they understand what they're paying for? What are we going to apply that's going to benefit us, the applicator, in the future? Because ultimately, when we get to the yard for the next visit, we don't want it to be in worse condition than it is currently. So whatever we apply at this first application, we have to make sure it's going to make it easier on us the next time we're on the property. And lastly, what weeds are going to be present? There's a whole host, depending on the time of year, what weeds are going to be present. So Fescue, we'll say it's February, late February, whenever, we'll call it late winter. Fescue is going to be, fairly dormant, and it's going to be tip burn from all the snow that's been on the ground, or freezing cold weather. What can we apply to provide an immediate impact? We can't do a whole lot color-wise. We could probably come in and spray it with ammonium sulfate and get a little bit of color out of it, but probably not much. So what can we do to provide an immediate impact? Color-wise, not much. What's left? Weeds. We can kill weeds in February. How do you kill weeds in February? What kind of weeds are we going to see in February? February, we're going to have winter annuals. They're going to be relatively small, where they germinated last fall. Some of them reach maturity, some of them are still in the baby stage, but we can control them. 95% of them are going to be broadleaf. All right, so we need a broadleaf herbicide to be applied in the winter. So something that's going to be effective in the cold. What broadleaf herbicides are going to be effective in the cold? 2,4-D, triclopyr, fluroxypyr, they're all going to work. They're all going to control, henbit, chickweed, thistles, clovers. That's everything that's going to be, growing then in late February. To get a more powerful knockdown, to give you that visual impact to the customer, something that's going to provide an immediate improvement, that customer knows that what you applied is what they're paying for, is to use an Ester formulation. Ester formulations are going to be a little bit hotter. They're using basically an oil-based formulation. It's going to give you better penetration as far as the leaf tissue, and it's going to give you a quicker kill. So that way when you spray the yard with it, the customer's going to know you sprayed the yard, you killed weeds. And then what are you going to do that's going to provide future improvement? Well, it's February. What can we do to provide future improvement? Actually, a couple things. One, we can prevent what's going to come in summer. That's a perfect time to put down a pre-emergent. Pre-emergents work best when they're done in split applications. You get better coverage that way. So it's a good time to run a half rate of a product like, prodiamine or pendimethalin or what was it, dimension. It's a good time to start your first half rate of those particular products. So that's something that can be applied then. That's going to give you a benefit down the road to make it easier when you come back to the lawn. Not only did you kill the weeds from this current application, you put down a pre-emergent that's going to prevent a lot of weeds from returning for the next time you show up to do your next application. Color-wise, there's not a whole lot you can do in the short term, but you can put down like an ultra slow release fertilizer, like the MESA fertilizers, or like a 70% polycoat, or the XCU, PCSCU, whatever it is, like a good 70% slow release. It won't release when you put it down then. However, as it starts transitioning from mid-February to mid-March, and we start having those 75-degree days, maybe a day in the 80s, that fertilizer is going to start releasing more and more and more as it warms up. Then all of a sudden you've got a green yard even though you haven't been on it in 4 weeks. So we got a whole host of things we can do, but let's manage cash flow and let's find out how much time it takes to produce it. Pre-emergents aren't too expensive. They're a necessary evil. You got to buy them. You got to put them out. Otherwise, you're going to have a train wreck lawn come June. So I just write that into the expense of the first two applications. A pre-emergent's going to have to be there. Weed controls. Weed controls can vary from not expensive to super duper expensive based on what you're doing. I like to roll my own weed controls versus buying a name brand weed control. Like, for instance, we'll say, Lesco has their Momentum FX2, which is, 2,4-D, triclopyr, and fluroxapyr. I like to do something different, similar but different, where I will run, 2,4-D ester with triclopyr ester with carfentrazone. It's going to give me the same level of knockdown, and it's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than buying that Lesco product. Now, when it comes to doing something like that, this is not something I recommend everybody do right off the bat, because what you're going to have to do is take the time to read that label. Not read it once, not read it twice, but be able to understand everything going on in that label, every precaution, every wind regulation, how close you can apply it to water, how close you can be to a storm drain, what weeds it's going to control, what weeds it's going to have a hard time controlling, why you apply it, why the auxin herbicides kill weeds the way they kill. You need to understand every bit of that before you start trying to mix different chemicals like that. For instance, back in the day, people would like to mix MSMA and 2,4-D. And what happens if you just take, a jug of MSMA and you pour it in your beaker, say I need 33 mils of MSMA and I need 6 mils of 2,4-D. What happens? It turns into a solid brick. Not saying that, 2,4-D and triclopyr are going to cause that, but chemicals, we're dealing with chemicals. They can have interactions. You have to be very careful. You have to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and the label tells you that. And if you can't understand a label, then you need to find somebody who can help you, coach you along through understanding the label, because that's really the most important part of what we do day in and day out. So, pre-emergents, not too expensive, necessary evil. Weed controls can be expensive, not too expensive. Again, another necessary evil. When you're doing pre-emergents and weed control applications, you want to blanket the entire lawn. Not part of it, the entire thing. Because anywhere you miss with that pre-emergent, it's going to be obvious come summertime because it's going to be full of weeds. Again, you're trying to save yourself by applying it now for later. So here's the dilemma. So you spend a little money on pre-emergent, you spend a little money on weed controls. Ultra slow release fertilizers, they're not cheap. Any way around it, they are not cheap. So, all of a sudden you went from, not too expensive of an application to a really expensive application. What's the benefit of having a really expensive application now versus having one for your next round? Well, that's really a matter of personal preference. I like to go with the expensive application on the front end. The reason being is that it comes back to how much time does it take to produce it. I can get through my first round really quickly. I'm not getting a ton of phone calls for people to come look at yards because only a few people are just starting to think about lawn care. Not everybody is. So I've got time to get all that down. I've got the permagreen, so I can spread my fertilizer and I can spray at the same time. Not everybody has that luxury. But does that mean you have to blanket spray an entire yard with a skid steer and then go back and push spread it with fertilizer? Some people have to do that. Another thing you can do is get pre-emergent impregnated on fertilizer. Spread it and then spot spray for weeds. I don't like to spot spray for weeds in the winter because so many of them are so low to the ground I can't see them all. So broadcast application tends to give me more thorough control. So that's through our first application.